Good morning and welcome. My name is Laura Jacobs, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. The Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey is a nonprofit organization working towards the education and prevention of brain injury throughout New Jersey. Today's webinar, titled Neurofatigue, the Tired Brain and How to Manage It, will be presented by Dr. Erin Fultz. Dr. Fultz is a staff neuropsychologist at the Center for Brain Injuries at JFK Johnson Rehabilitation Institute within Hackensack Meridian Health. Dr. Fultz works with an interdisciplinary rehabilitation team to provide integrated and comprehensive neurorehabilitation services. She specializes in the comprehensive evaluation and treatment of patients with acquired and traumatic brain injuries. Her goals in treatment are to empower those who have had a brain injury to improve their symptom management, reduce the impact of cognitive deficits, and enhance healthy behaviors to improve quality of life. So now, with no further ado, Dr. Erin Fultz.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Laura, for that kind introduction. I'm so excited to be here virtually with you all today. And today we will be discussing neurofatigue. This is a topic that I see and I treat most often, but I often feel that not enough is known or talked about for patients. So many times people are surprised by the term when they hear it, not the sensation though, because this is so common following brain injury. So let's get started. Before I disappear off the video, I want to at least say who I am. What on earth is a neuropsychologist and why am I here talking about neurofatigue with you? So what I do is I study brain-behavior relationships. That means I'm looking at how the brain is working, how this is impacting how a person is in their life. Cognitively, how they're thinking, emotionally, socially. I work at an outpatient rehabilitation center, and I work specifically with people who have had a brain injury. I do assessments and testing. Maybe some of you have been through one of those grueling experiences before. I'm looking for patterns in the scores, what people are telling me has changed since their injury, and those assessments inform my treatment approaches. So in treatment, my goal is to help people manage their symptoms and improve cognitive functioning. I find that brain injury recovery is done best with a team approach. I'm very fortunate that I work with an interdisciplinary team. It includes physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, a counselor. We're regularly in contact with other doctors and referring out so that you have everyone you need on your team, because brain injury can feel a lot like a puzzle and there's so many different pieces, and each piece does need its own attention and approach. And neurofatigue is one of those pieces. So let's see if we can learn more about how to manage that. Also a note to anyone out there who may have had a brain injury, and some things to consider is one, if you want to remember something on a slide, or if there's a slide that seems like it has a lot of words on it, I'm sorry, I had a lot of information to pack in. I'm going to try and go at a nice, easy pace, but you can always take a photo of what you see on your screen, and Laura has told me that BIA and Jay will be very kindly posting this online later, so you can always go back and reference something, okay? We'll have questions at the end, so if you have something in mind, there's that Q&A box, you can type it. I just might not get to it until the end, but I will see it later, okay? So now I'm going to go off my video so that it's not too distracting, and we're going to jump in. Here we go. All right, so fatigue, what is it? There's a lot of fancy definitions out there for what it is, but broken down simply, it's feeling tired. It's not having enough energy, and it's not being able to do as much as you want because of how you feel. I think this is important because it's not just the feeling, but it is something that's impacting your day-to-day functioning, getting in the way. Let's look at fatigue and brain injury specifically. This is one of the most reported, most common, and long-lasting symptoms following a brain injury. Today when I say brain injury, I'm being very general. So I mean traumatic brain injury, including the mild traumatic brain injury or concussion. I mean stroke. This could be surgeries, brain bleeds, anything like that. So this is very broad. You see here on this slide, though, I do have some numbers for specifically a TBI and a stroke. This is just showing you how common fatigue is. After TBI, reported studies say 21 to 73%, but I think most of us would agree it's probably closer to the 73%, if not more. It can be difficult to capture sometimes that fatigue. Same with stroke, very significant, and people identify it as one of the worst symptoms after that, even 2 years later. And so this shows what a big impact it makes and why it's so important for us to find ways to manage it and approach it. Of note, I think it's very important that we know that the type of brain injury doesn't predict the amount of fatigue. So there's not a direct relationship between how severe the injury was and how severe the fatigue is. This is especially important, I think, with my mild traumatic brain injuries, my concussions. People hear the word mild and they think, oh, well, then you shouldn't be so tired, or it should just be a milder experience. But no, actually, the severity of the injury, even your age, that's not going to directly correlate with how tired you are. And stroke too, even if someone says, well, it was a small stroke, well, location, size, the type of stroke you had, that does not predict how impairing the fatigue will be. So this is not, this is not a comparison thing. Any type of brain injury you have, your experience is unique and your own, and you can have very severe fatigue or very mild fatigue. Now, I want to talk about different types of tired, right? Because actually neurofatigue is one type of fatigue, and there are some others. So you say, well, this is a talk about neurofatigue. Why is she discussing all these other types? Well, I think it's important to point out because they can overlap, all right? So it's not exclusive. Just because you have one doesn't mean you don't have another. But the way that you recover and from each type of fatigue is a little different. So it's important to know what else may be in the mix so that we know what is the neurofatigue and how to manage it. So let's start a bit first here. So physical fatigue. This is really directly related to bodily physical activity, right? If you had a big exercise day, you've been running around all day, this is going to be it. Muscles get sore. You're just tired, right? And how you recover from that is you rest your body, or you prep your body before something like stretching. You take a nap. You hydrate, you heat the muscles, everything feels better after that. Somebody with a physical fatigue, you might hear them say things like this, oh, I'm pooped. I'm really dragging today. I need to lie down. But they get better after that physical rest. Here's something called stress fatigue. People don't always know this term as well. This is related to chronic stress, and it's not just an emotional stress. This is more related to how your body's reacting to it. After long periods of time, the body is producing, these stress hormones and cortisol and things, and over time, the body just gets weakened. Very common is a weakened immune system. So I don't know how many of you out there have been studying for an exam, or it's the holidays, or your in-laws are in town, or there's a big work project, and you make it all the way through. And once you finally take that test or something's over, you find that you get sick, you get a cold. Well, that's an example of stress fatigue. Your body pushed through, but once it was all finally done and it didn't need to push anymore, the immune system crashed a bit and you need to take time to recover. How you recover from this stress fatigue specifically is, if you can, reduce the stress level or remove that stressor, but also relax and exercise. So interestingly, with physical fatigue, we needed to rest the body. Stress fatigue, exercising can actually be a way of helping. People are stressed, right? They're going to say, I'm so stressed out, I feel fried, but really so much is going on right now. Emotional fatigue is a very important one to pay attention to as well. This results from highly emotional events, emotional reactions. This could be losses, worries, a crisis going on. It can also be related to an underlying mood disorder, right? If somebody has a depression, an anxiety. Things to really look for with emotional fatigue, this is irritability. People are not as interested or enjoying things that they used to love, a hopelessness, a lack of motivation. The body can also react. Our gastrointestinal system, GI system is very closely linked to our mood and our brains, and so people can get upset stomachs. How to recover here. This is important to manage this. This is talking to a therapist or a counselor. This is doing meditation, yoga, something calming, exercise, deep breathing, focusing on a self-care, and in some cases a medication may be important to help control the level of depression or anxiety. So it's knowing when to also reach out and get help. Emotional fatigue always needs help from others. You're going to hear people say things like this, right? They're so angry, they want to scream, they want to be left alone. There's this sense of not knowing where to start, really. And so these are things to look out for. Now, of course, what brings you all here today? Neurofatigue. Let's talk about it. This is something that is a mental tiredness. There's a lot of words for this, by the way. So I call it neurofatigue. I think it's catchy. It's also been called cognitive fatigue, brain tiredness, mental exhaustion, mental tired. But all of those things where it relates to mental and the brain and the fatigue, that's what we're talking about here, right? And this is an exhaustion or tiredness that's coming after prolonged cognitive activity. Whenever I say cognitive, I'm meaning related to thinking, the mind, or also a sensory overstimulation, too many lights, noises, being in a crowded space. Now, we can all experience neurofatigue. Every human on earth can and does. The difference here is that usually you probably didn't notice it as much. And that was really, you could make it all the way to the end of the day before getting tired. You could make it all the way to the end of the week before feeling kind of tired. But after brain injury, there's a shift. What happens is that fatigue comes on faster, bigger, and it lasts longer. So you feel tired quicker than before. The brain can become tired even after just small loads of activity, little things that you do that maybe before you never gave much thought to. It can also take a longer amount of time to bounce back, right? It's not going to be this quick, oh, well, I took a quick nap and it was all good. Sometimes people will say after a very busy day, they're still recovering even the next day, and it's confusing. And this can persist, this fatigue can last even after a person recovers from other symptoms of the brain injury. So if there was a physical symptom, let's say perhaps a skull fracture, there was bleeding in the brain, bodily injury, all those things could heal up just fine, and they may still be feeling fatigue, and that's still a symptom of brain injury that's persisting. What does it sound like? You know, people have a lot of difficulty putting words to it because it can feel like such a weird experience. And I've heard so many ways of describing it, some that are really almost poetic the way people put it because they've had to spend a lot of time with it. This is some things I've heard. I can't think straight, right? That's that cognitive piece. My brain is foggy, or I'm in a haze. This is that difficult to describe, but a feeling that is just really all-encompassing. I don't feel right. People feel off. They feel different than they used to. So if you say these things, or if you're a family member, a caregiver, or a treatment professional, and you start to hear these kind of things, this is a good tip-off that we might be dealing with a neurofatigue, and we need to manage that specifically. Before we dive too much deeper into neurofatigue, I want to clear some things up. What neurofatigue is not, right? Neurofatigue is not doing too little. In fact, it's the opposite. You've usually done a bit too much. It is not a lack of stimulation. Sometimes people will say, well, maybe I just need to get out, or family members will say, hey, you've got to get back out in the world there. No, actually, in fact, neurofatigue is usually a brain's reaction to being overstimulated. It's a sensitive brain that is being overstimulated. And most importantly, I would say, neurofatigue is not laziness. I want everybody to, wherever you are, repeat that to yourself. Because even studies have found that it's very common for family and friends to interpret this type of fatigue as a laziness. You know, they're very well meaning. They don't know, and they don't mean it to be a hurtful comment. They're trying to help you maybe, but that's not it. And I also start to hear my patients identifying that, right? They'll say, well, I guess I was just lazy today. And I like to stop that right there and say, no, this is not a laziness. Laziness has its own ways to address it. This is a neurofatigue, and that's why you feel this way. So this is why I think it's important for everyone who's here today to learn about neurofatigue, to avoid that mistake, and for survivors to share information with the people in your life about what you're experiencing, and for friends and family to get the information about it, which again is what everyone's here to do today. So, okay, now we know what it isn't. Cleared the air on that. What is it? This is a sense of the brain not working the way it normally does, or for a brain injury patient, right, that's saying, my brain's not working the way it did before. I hear that a lot. It's a decreased productivity and an efficiency. Now, why I have these two words here, productivity means how much you're doing. It's like a quantity, how long can you work, how much are you churning out. Efficiency is the quality of the thing you're doing. It's how well are you managing your time, are you making mistakes, are they very accurate. This is important because neurofatigue can impact both of these. I get some people who are still working away, they're doing a lot, they're highly active, but they're not really being efficient with their time. And I get other folks who are so tired they can't even do anything, and there we need to help them increase their productivity. We need to get them doing more. So think about that when you think of your fatigue, if you have it, is which one of these is it? More things that people tell me is I can't think right, I don't feel like myself, I can't function, just that the brain isn't working the way that they want it to. The presentation of neurofatigue can vary from person to person. There are, of course, some commonalities in it, but people will have different presentations. So as we'll see in a bit, it's really important to know what your specific experience of neurofatigue is and why I listen so carefully for that from people, because I want to know what exactly it looks like for them. It's a very different kind of tired, though. After a brain injury, neurofatigue can happen even after small activities. The most common thing I hear is, well, I used to be able to do this just fine without getting tired. Why is this happening now? This can happen after activities that are perfectly pleasant and enjoyable. Reading a book, hanging out with friends, dining out, seeing a show, things that you might have loved and had no problem before. You might still love them, but they can come with a neurofatigue or overstimulation. Neurofatigue can last all kinds of different amounts of time. It could last a few hours. It could take days to feel like you recover from an episode of it. And that's usually when it's not as well managed. So that's something we'll talk about later. And of course, it is something that persists, right? It might have been years since your injury and that you're still managing that fatigue a little bit. This can also fluctuate depending on the day and the activities. You're a human being, you have a lot of other things going on in life, and so you might have a day that you're just going to be more easily fatigued than others. That means that it's a little tough because it's a moving target. There's no given activity that will never make you neurofatigued. It might just depend on the day. And it can appear rapidly. You notice I have a little asterisk here, a little star. This is because it can feel that it appears rapidly. It feels like it comes out of nowhere. But you and I are going to talk a little bit more about that later, because it actually, you're getting signs and signals that it's coming earlier. We're just not trained to listen to those. So that will be something that we look at later. So neurofatigue, again, it's a kind of a weird thing to explain to people, a weird thing to explain to yourself. I love metaphors. I got a million of them, and here's one of them. Here's how I describe neurofatigue. So when you think of your phone, to really have your phone work, it needs two key components. It needs battery power to run, and it needs connectivity. If you've got a smartphone, this means you're hooked up to Wi-Fi so you can do everything that the phone does. Even if you don't have a smartphone, you still need to be connected to a wireless carrier so that you can even make calls, right? Well, after a brain injury, first thing is the connectivity gets a bit iffy, right? This is where people feel there's glitches, kind of mental glitches, or they're thinking slower. So this is like your slow connection to something, to Wi-Fi, for example. But let's jump over to battery power. After brain injury, you can't get a full charge anymore. This is important because that means you don't have as much battery life to get you through your day. Battery life can just sink all of a sudden, and you have to work on recharging yourself because it's just not working the same way it was before. I told you I got a million metaphors. I also like to think of it in terms of, right, a fuel tank. If you've got a full tank, it's totally empty, it's in between. Well, after brain injury, you just can't fill that tank up quite to full capacity. So that means you don't have as much fuel to go about your day, and you need to be thinking a little differently about your fuel efficiency. What does it feel like? What does it look like? Now, I said this is different for every person. Everyone's going to have their own unique experience of neurofatigue. I know this is a very busy slide with a lot on it. That's because neurofatigue comes with a lot of different symptoms. These are ones that I have pulled, from what I have heard from people, and I like to break it down into some different categories here. So cognitive, how you're thinking, what's changed there. This can be those difficulties remembering or concentrating. People can't multitask or make decisions, thinking slower, things that people used to do really well. I get a lot of people say, well, mental math was faster before. That feels slowed or more difficult, or you're making mistakes. There's also some physical or sensory symptoms that come with neurofatigue. This is that feeling of exhaustion. Sometimes people actually get sleep problems. So even though they're super exhausted, they're not sleeping great at night. If you've got headaches, headaches usually get worse, or same with a visual eye strain for anyone with visual symptoms, that can happen as well. Dizziness, if you have a balance problem, a neurofatigue might make your balance a little worse, and you might feel a little more clumsy or a little more unsteady. And there's also emotional symptoms with the fatigue. There's irritability. People get a little snappy with others. The mind feels like it's kind of all over the place. Or they're more easily triggered to cry or feel sad or feel stressed. Now, you might say, hey, some of these things sound like those different types of fatigue you talked about earlier, the emotional fatigue or that physical fatigue. And yes, they do. Remember, there is an overlap between all these things. And sometimes, though, there is an emotional presentation of a neurofatigue just because you are so exhausted. This is where, it's tough. It's not as much of a science. I can't tell you exactly what it is except through trial and error. And what we do is we take strategies, which we'll talk about in a moment, and you apply them. And if you feel like you used a neurofatigue strategy and your emotions felt better, like you felt less irritable, well, then that sounds like it was coming from the neurofatigue. If you try these neurofatigue strategies and they're not fixing the, eye strain, or they're not fixing your headaches and how you're feeling and your emotions, well, then we might be looking at other things that we need to address with different tools. So just keep that in mind. But this is to say, neurofatigue is not just I feel tired. There are so many other facets to it, which is why it can sometimes be difficult to target. Well, what triggers it? Well, I'll tell you, just about anything can. This is a list, and it's probably not even a whole list of what can trigger your fatigue after brain injury. But here are some very common ones. Sensory stimulation, bright lights, loud noises. Very common after brain injury in general is that sensitivity. Well, the more fatigued you are, the more sensitive your brain may feel to these things. Overstimulating environments. This is parties or a crowd, restaurants, stores, the grocery store, one of the worst places people report afterwards. They say, gosh, I just got exhausted. Well, think how much stimulation a store is. It's light, it's movement of people. You're scanning, looking at all these different products. So that involves a lot. And you're trying to remember what you got there for. You're requiring a lot of your brain, and it can fatigue it. Focusing for long periods of time, multitasking is a really tough one. Conversations, right? When you're having conversations with people, it's actually requiring a lot of your mental attention to shift between, to think what you're going to say next. Same with driving. We think it's such a simple thing. We don't think much about it anymore, but it's requiring a lot of your attention shifting, vigilance to what's around you, multitasking. Screen time, especially if you have visual symptoms, challenging tasks, working long hours without a break, busy days, all of these things can trigger increased neurofatigue. Well, what causes neurofatigue specifically? You'll say, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I, as a rehab specialist, I really want to know more about how to help it with the function. It's also tough to answer because exact cause is not well known, but there are a number of good theories out there looking at this. There have been a lot of findings about it. I'm not going to dive into the research for today. I'm happy to point people in the right direction if that's something that interests you. I think the important takeaway is that changes are occurring on a cellular level, a very small level, something you might not even be able to see on a scan. Overall, the idea is that your brain has certain needs for resources and energy. After an injury, something has happened so that these resources are not as available and the brain cannot function as efficiently. And I think these changes on a cellular level are why we can see fatigue may be there even after our brain seems to have recovered. And it's certainly why people with concussion, that mild TBI, while you also feel fatigue, even though there's no findings on a CT or an MRI, which I know can be very frustrating. And that's, again, it's because things are happening, it's biochemical, these cellular levels. How do we measure it? I can't sit and give you a neurofatigue score. Part of that is because it's fluctuating throughout the day, and part of it is because there's not an exact way that we can compare you to everyone else. It's really comparing you to yourself. So we do have scales and surveys. You can see 2 examples of questions that may get asked to try and capture this neurofatigue. Notice that it's becoming fatigued after doing activities. I really like to listen to you, right? If I see you in my office, I want to hear, what are you experiencing? Because you're the expert on you. You know how you feel, and that is important data. I also look at observations, right? So during an activity, or certainly during testing, sometimes I start to see people slow down. Or maybe you feel it too. Maybe you feel you slow down, or you notice someone in your life who has a brain injury, they slow down, they start making more errors, or maybe they were perfectly accurate earlier. And also sometimes other symptoms start to increase because the brain is getting tired, it can't manage those symptoms. So things like the headache kind of breaks through, tired, strained eyes start to come in. So these are all ways that we combine and look to say, is this neurofatigue? What is the experience of it? Now, really what you all wanted to come today is say, how do I treat this? How do I get this to go away? Well, the tough answer is that there is no cure for neurofatigue. There's no, this is going to go away in this amount of time either. That's what people really want to know, and it's the question I get asked most, and the question I have the biggest lack of answer for is how long. For some, neurofatigue does gradually improve over time. In fact, I'm sure if you have had a brain injury or you know someone who has, they might have been so exhausted right after the injury, and then they slowly start to improve. And so it does happen. It's just, does it all go away? It's hard to say. Some people it does, but for most, they find themselves just having to manage it. So, I say don't give up hope just because I'm telling you that neurofatigue doesn't go away in a certain amount of time. Know that there are ways to manage it so that you can feel better even having it there. So my focus is on managing symptoms, right? This is with tools, this is with strategies, and we're going to talk about those next. I like to say treatment is done through this kind of 4-step process. There's awareness. That's enhancing your awareness and knowledge of your triggers and symptoms. Part of what you do by examining your own neurofatigue and learning about it at something like this presentation. The next A is acquisition. This is acquiring, learning strategies that help you. Then we have application. It's not enough just to know the strategy. You have to apply it in your daily life. You need to use it to change your behavior to manage your fatigue. And lastly is self-monitoring. This is kind of constantly noticing how you're feeling so that you know what to do about it. So let's delve into those a little more. Also, I do see some questions coming in, so thank you, don't worry, I do see you. I'm going to tackle those at the end. Thank you for typing those. A very, very quick note on medications, because I cannot prescribe, I do not prescribe medications, but there are some medications that are used to address the fatigue aspect of people's recovery. There's something specifically for, the traumatic brain injury population, so if you're on and you have one of these medications and you're wondering, yes, there are some that they found can help with fatigue, that can enhance sometimes the processing speed, help you think faster, or attention. There are also medications that sometimes doctors will prescribe you to help with some underlying issues. For example, if you have a sleep disorder, an insomnia, or disrupted sleep pattern, right, you're never going to be able to fully get rest and recharge your battery if your sleep is disrupted. So they may give you medications, or they may recommend an over-the-counter like melatonin to help you manage that, or stimulants. Sometimes some of you may be on those. Well, my word of warning is that some medications might help you with the sleep, but they can negatively impact a cognitive function. And after brain injury, that's a delicate balance, is to help you with sleep, but not to disrupt your recovery cognitively. So really the takeaway I want you to walk away with is that be sure you are talking with your prescribing doctors about your history of brain injury, okay? So management, here I've been talking about that. How do we do it? Even with the medication, by the way, I want to note if you're on one or if you're interested in one, it's not a cure-all, right? It's not going to be the silver bullet to anything, because even with a medication, you should still be using heaps of management strategies, and that's going to actually enhance the medication's effectiveness and make you feel better. So, you know, this is not a one or the other kind of thing. You want to listen to what your doctors are telling you, but either way, with or without, you're going to want some management strategies. And for anyone interested, I know I see some people interested in the medications. I'll answer what I can, but like I said, I don't prescribe, so I can't speak too much about that. If you're interested in them, I highly recommend you speak to your physician, your physiatrist, whoever you have, maybe a neurologist, someone like that. They're going to be able to tell you what your options are better. Again, my focus is on the strategies, of which we're going to talk about now, and which I consider highly important, whether you have meds or without. In fact, very important even if you're on them. So management, what is it? Well, this is first of all accepting that you have the fatigue right now. I emphasize right now because I don't like people to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be dealing with this forever. We don't know that. We know what you have right now, and we have to deal with that. And the fact is that there's a neurofatigue there. You also have to take active and proactive steps to take care of yourself. It's not something you can just absorb and then all of a sudden it's going to feel better. It does take a little bit of work. So by managing your neurofatigue, you will help yourself feel better in the moment. You will reduce the severity of the neurofatigue. It won't feel as extreme. You can shorten the time it takes to recover from an episode of neurofatigue, right? You might be, you know, had a really busy day. How long it takes you to recover can, and kind of that bounce back will really depend on how you've managed it. And this is about finding new ways to keep living your life, feeling the best that you can, right? Because a brain injury doesn't stop you from doing what you need to do. And neither should your neurofatigue. So this is about being you, doing what you want to do, but doing it a little differently so that you feel better. So let's get back to that awareness piece, right? This is acknowledging that your brain function has changed. Your brain has changed, and it needs more support to help it function at its best. So we want to help it out here. The goal is to understand your signs and symptoms that tell you you're getting fatigued. You know, I also can't just give you an answer on this about what those are because you're your own unique individual. Everyone is different. We say that if you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury because everyone is unique and different, and so it needs to be treated that way. So you need to study what your neurofatigue looks like. Ask yourself some of these questions. What changes when you become fatigued? How does the body feel? Are you having a physical response? What is your thinking like? This is that cognition, right? The cognitive aspect. Are you thinking slower? Are you making mistakes? Does it feel hazy? Emotionally, how do you feel when you're getting fatigued? How do you behave when you're fatigued? Sometimes other people actually notice something in the way that you are behaving and acting and what you're choosing to do. And also what activities, right? What environments or tasks trigger that fatigue? Sometimes people know that every time they go to the grocery store or the Walmart, that's very fatiguing for them. Or whenever they're in loud restaurants, and so they need to adjust what restaurants they go to. So these are questions to ask yourself, all right? I know there's a lot there. This presentation will be available later, so don't stress about either having to write everything down or take notes. You'll be able to review this later, which will be really helpful, I hope. So strategies, I've been talking a lot about them. What are they? I think of them as tools and a toolbox. So tools and tricks that are going to help you manage your fatigue on a day-to-day basis. These can help you in the moment, but they're best used before you feel tired. Sounds crazy. I'll talk about it in a minute. But you want to build up your toolbox. How do you do it? Well, you can learn strategies from someone like me, a neuropsychologist, with other treatment providers or rehabilitation team. You can learn them perhaps from peer support from others who've had a brain injury. They might be able to share some helpful tips. I know there's a lot of support groups that BIA helps run around the state. And also with the help of friends and family. It's good to have their feedback as well because they might be seeing the fatigue even before you do. So they're valuable information here. Even if they're not experiencing it the same way you are, they've got some good insights. So there's a lot of different strategies. They vary person to person, but there are some that are staples. There are some that should be used for all, and this is my first one. It's take a break. You need rest. Be proactive and anticipate your need for rest. If you have neurofatigue, you should just assume that you will get tired. So think ahead and plan ahead. Schedule a planned break ahead of time. Take a break before you are tired. I know it sounds crazy. People wait until they're tired and then they rest. You might have been able to do that before a brain injury, but you cannot do it after. Once you get too tired, the brain is going to shut down. Think about that cell phone analogy I made earlier. You know how when your phone totally goes out of battery life, you have to plug it in and it has to do a full reboot and it takes a while? Well, that's your brain on too much neurofatigue. All right, if you wait too late, you're going to have to do the full reboot. You waste a lot of time and energy. If you can catch yourself before you're tired, it's like charging that phone throughout the day. You're not going to hit that wall. You're not going to crash, right? Mentally and in terms of your energy. Taking a break is going to help your mental energy last longer too. If you don't take any breaks, maybe you're done with all your energy by mid-morning even or afternoon. Well, taking those breaks throughout the day means you can make it longer in the day. You can do more of what you want to do. It's also making sure you're doing it efficiently. Now, I want to clear some things up about rest, right? People say, well, I can't rest. That's a waste of time, or I can't stop. I have a lot to do. You wouldn't believe people fight me all the time on this, and I tell you, rest does not always mean sleep. There's other ways to rest. Sometimes it is a cat nap, but not always. It's also not doing nothing. Sometimes people say, well, I can't do nothing, or family caregivers will think their loved one is doing nothing, when in fact they're resting. So it's very important to know that sometimes you have to take a break and stop. And this is a conscious decision you're making to help yourself feel and function better. This is a strategy. Sometimes it is literally doing nothing because you need to, but sometimes it's just doing something different. Sometimes you're going to need a short break, and sometimes you're going to need a much longer one, and that's going to depend probably on the fatigue. I would say, though, don't push your limits. People say, well, I'm feeling fine. I'm just going to keep working for hours. No, no, no. Stop and take that break for a bit, even a short one, before you need it. So what are some other strategies? Again, I know this is a busy slide. There's a lot on it. This will be available later, or snap a quick picture of it. Let's walk through it a few. This is what I say in the moment. So when you all of a sudden catch yourself and you're fatigued, switch yourself to a task that requires less mental effort. If you're sitting there doing your taxes, well, maybe you need to unplug a bit and go shred some paper or wash the dishes, right? Switch between tasks and think what requires a lot of my mind and what doesn't, what might be a little more physical. There's breathing, taking a hot bath or shower, meditating in the moment. There are a lot of great phone apps out there that have guided meditations, so you don't even have to think. You can mentally unplug and just listen. Sometimes you do need to take a short nap. Don't take one too long, right, where you wake up groggy. This is the importance of taking maybe some of those little power naps. Doing something mindless, right? Again, there's some of those favorite shows or those games on your phone that you can just zone out. That's key. And if you have visual symptoms, maybe a TV show and a game on your phone are not the right call. You actually need to switch away from screen time because your eyes are getting tired. Take time to play, take time to be physical if you have the energy to. Also reduce stimulation, right? This is a time, the brain is a sensitive organ, and you need to turn down lights and noises, find a quiet place, or listen to a soothing music instead of something, too loud. So this is in the moment when you catch yourself. I love people planning ahead though. So here's my plan ahead, my proactive tips. Plan your day ahead of time so you know that you'll be able to switch between activities. So if you have a lot of cognitive activities, well, switch it up. Maybe spread that out across the week. A great way to do this is to get a planner or a calendar and write in it. Write all your activities, because this way you can anticipate the energy you're going to need for a given day or for the week. So don't stack, 3 Zoom calls with your friends and family right in a row. That's going to be exhausting. Can you spread them out? Have them on different days? Or maybe at least have half an hour break between them? Take lunch breaks. This is for my folks who eat at your desk. This is especially tough during the pandemic because our desks have become our homes and our lunch spots. Well, just find a way to step away. Again, this is a shifting. This is you need to move your attention elsewhere so that your brain can get a break from what it was doing. Maintain healthy sleep habits. Have a good bedtime routine. Stay hydrated. Eat regular healthy meals. These are kind of basic life tips that really you should be doing because it's going to help your fatigue anyway. Meditation, I say again, it was great in the moment. Well, it's great to plan ahead. Daily meditation is best. In fact, there's great studies out there about meditation really helping your brain after brain injury as well as in general. So I highly recommend that. Having regular physical activities, right? Schedule enjoyable tasks too. I don't want people just saying it's got to all be work. They only have the energy for work. I know that you have less, but you need to enjoy some things too, and that's actually going to help boost your energy level. Break your tasks into smaller chunks. This is where that calendar or that planner or making a list can be very helpful. And don't be afraid to delegate. If you have something that you can let someone else do, let them do it so you have more energy to do something else. This can help when you write things down. Maybe keeping a journal because it helps you process it and gives you a place for how you're feeling about things. But also write in yourself notes, write lists. I get people that tell me, well, I don't need to write a grocery list, I'll remember it. I say, no, you are making your brain do more than it has to. If there's something you can write down or you can put in your phone or you can task to somebody else, do it because neurofatigue is all about conserving and using your energy wisely. You've heard the phrase work smarter, not harder, right? That's kind of an important thing to think of with neurofatigue. Also, of course, maintain your wellness. If you've got doctors, counselors, people you need to see, or people you think you need to see, make those appointments so that you maintain your health throughout this. Now, we talked self-monitoring. I mentioned that earlier. This is very important with neurofatigue because people always tell me that it hits them out of nowhere, but it doesn't. Your brain and your body are sending you signs that it is coming, that you are feeling tired. You just aren't used to listening to it. And after brain injury, it's very important to listen to all of these. That's why I said pay attention to those symptoms that you have, physical, emotional, cognitive, because those are the little warning signs. So don't wait till you have a full-blown headache. Maybe when you start to have a little one, something's happening. Don't wait till you're making huge mistakes on things. Maybe you're making a few little ones, and that's a sign fatigue is coming. Pay attention to these warning signs so that you can do something about them. And when I work with people, we make a numerical scale, and that way you can say, well, I'm a 2 today, or I'm a 5 today. And it's a way that you can check in with yourself. I call it a cognitive energy scale. You can make one of those with a provider yourself, or you can make your own. You can make one with family. And this is something that's good to communicate with those in your life too, is have a shared language for it. So they might not understand a neurofatigue, but they might be able to understand that you're at a level 2 today and they need to give you space or let you rest. Also, caregivers, friends, family, treatment providers, you can make a scale to ask people how they're feeling because sometimes someone's having trouble self-monitoring and they need that help to remind themselves to do that. So here's our little friendly car again, and what's the difference? So we talked about fuel tank. Well, what is self-monitoring? Self-monitoring is thinking of your fuel tank and asking, how much fuel do I have right now? And how far do I have to drive? Because that's going to tell you, do I have a lot of tasks today and I need a lot more energy that I either do or I don't have? And how much do I have to give to the day? So when you think self-monitoring, this is, you're thinking of that fuel tank, but you need to ask yourself these questions. And you need to ask them more than once during the day because that energy level can fluctuate. So you can't wake up and just say, what am I at today? This is a constant asking of yourself and checking in with yourself. Well, how do I remember to do that? You may be saying, this sounds exhausting. I have to say, I get that people will say, this was tiring. I have to do so much more than I used to. And that is true, and that's very tough. But by doing this, it gets easier over time. It becomes more second nature the more you do it. And it's also going to help you feel better. Now, how to remember to even do this or how to remember your strategies. Sometimes it's just hard to remember because you're so neurofatigued. Other times, maybe your brain injury makes it harder to remember things. So here's some of my helpful tips. Set reminders. Use alarms in your phone that maybe cue you to take a break, or they remind you to meditate for a few minutes, or they even remind you to check your energy level. If you're about to start an activity, set your timer that reminds you when to take a rest break. If you're sitting down to do a project or schoolwork or you're reading, just set it to go off every 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and it's just a time to stop and say, wait, what's my fuel tank at? How much more do I have to go? Should I take a break? Write notes to yourself. I say put them in very common areas like your bathroom mirror or the kitchen fridge, and maybe your note just says, stop. How are you feeling right now? Or take a break. It's okay. So leave those reminders for yourself. And again, this is where you can get help from friends and family and caregivers. You want to educate them about the neurofatigue and how your symptoms are so they understand what's going on with you. Both of you should talk about how you want a reminder communicated, because a friend or family might just say, hey, take a break, or you may say, hey, I'm leaving, and there can be some miscommunications there. So sit down and talk about what the language is that both of you want to use if you're having somebody help you out. Also, if you're the one with the neurofatigue, be open to feedback, because like I mentioned earlier, sometimes others in our lives, whether it's friends and family or even treatment providers, we can notice the signs that you're getting tired that you might not have been aware of yet. So it's great to welcome them into this conversation so that everyone can kind of communicate it on the same level and everything can run smoother. I also want to point out that when is it something else, right? Sometimes it's not just pure neurofatigue. Like I said, there can be an overlap between these other types of fatigue. Depression is something that one of the symptoms is fatigue, right? So when is it something like a mood? Well, if you're really losing interest in things, you're not motivated, you're feeling hopeless and no pleasure in things anymore, then we need to consider what your mood is or a depression. Talk to a medical provider, see a therapist or counselor, or see a psychiatrist. That doesn't mean you can't have neurofatigue along with it, and that would be treated by someone else or with these strategies, but you want to make sure you're addressing that emotional component. It's very important. It can be a real drain on your energy. You want to rule out medical issues that may be underlying the fatigue. If these neurofatigue strategies aren't working, nothing is working, is there an anemia, a thyroid problem, an unmanaged diabetes, or an endocrine issue, many other things that are more physiological, then you want to, again, talk to a medical provider. You might need to undergo testing to rule out a biological cause of the fatigue. There may be a medication to help boost that energy or boost the underlying condition. And we also need to rule out a pure sleep disorder. Yes, neurofatigue can mean your sleep isn't as good, and there are ways to address that. Sometimes people have an underlying insomnia, a disrupted sleep cycle. And that means that even when you sleep at night, you're not getting the rest you need, which is giving you that fuel for the day. So please talk to your medical provider. Maybe they'll have you get a sleep study, or a therapist or a counselor can help you with some sleep hygiene, those sleep healthy habits. All right, we're coming up. I want to make sure we have time for some questions. I see them coming through, but just in summary, I want everyone here to know that neurofatigue following brain injury is very real. You are not alone in experiencing it. It impacts each person differently, so it's important to understand your own unique experience and to communicate that with others. Understand your symptoms so that you can monitor them throughout the day. Use strategies, and as you see, I'm big on this. I'm a broken record. Take rest breaks and take them before you need them. Be proactive. I know it takes time and energy to manage neurofatigue, but it does help over time, and it helps you live your life. Ask for help when you need it, whether it's those close to you in your life or a treatment professional. And most importantly, be gentle and patient with yourself in this process. Okay, so I'm going to open this up to questions here. So let's see, I know I had some come through. If I don't have time to answer them all, I believe Laura said that there would be a way to get to some of those or get some to me later, okay? All right, so I'm going to run through these just in the order I got them. So how many years after a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury can neurofatigue symptoms continue? Great question. I hear that for all types of brain injuries. Unfortunately, I don't have that answer for that one because it could be a few years, it could be many years. People could be managing symptoms throughout their life. So it's hard to say. To me, though, focus on managing it, because then it becomes less noticeable and the fatigue becomes less intrusive. It doesn't get in the way as much. So I'm sorry, I tell everyone, I wish I had the magic number for you, but it's more about managing. Let's see, does the area of the brain that was injured impact the type, duration, extent, or any other aspect of neurofatigue? You know, generally no. Studies that I've looked into have said that it could be any type of injury. It could be like stroke, for example. The location of the stroke has not been found to be directly related to fatigue. So really, there might be areas of the brain that have more fatigue if they're responsible for, sleep cycles, perhaps. That could disrupt that. But overall, no, there's not a way to say this person's going to have real bad fatigue and this one's not. Great question. All right, I see some medication questions. So those interested in medications, what are specifically used for brain fatigue? Again, the one that in my area I hear the most about, it's called methylphenidate. That's on the slide, but your prescribing doctor would know whether that's indicated for you or not. Sometimes people also use stimulants like Adderalls, Ritalins, things like that. But much more the area of expertise with a psychiatrist who can prescribe, a neurologist, a physiatrist, or one of your physicians. Just important to explain to them what you're noticing, and that way they'll know whether it's a neurofatigue or perhaps it's more of a physical one. And let's see. I'm just going to take a look real quick. A great question here. Someone says that with the pandemic going on and we're all using Zoom and virtual stuff like today that they wouldn't normally use, is it normal to be experiencing neurofatigue without having had an actual brain injury? Yes, 1,000 times yes. There are some great papers coming out there, great articles that Zoom is its own form of fatigue. We call it Zoom exhaustion. Your brain is a complex thing, and it is used to having complex interactions with others, a lot of nonverbal communication with eye movements, like facial features, and Zoom doesn't really allow for that. As you can see, my video is not even on. Let's see if I can I'll share my video. But even here, there might be a little bit of a delay that you're seeing. And so yes, you will notice a fatigue, and you should use some of these strategies with your Zoom calls, whether you're not had a brain injury. Visually, it's straining, and it's just disconnecting, right? I'm never looking right at you unless I'm looking away from you. So great question. Someone's family member is seen by a general practitioner after having a severe TBI and not on any meds. That may be when you want to, medications may not have been indicated. It just might not be the right fit, or it might have impacted the cognitive recovery they were worried about. I would say if you could find, it might be best to find a specialist, a physiatrist at a rehabilitation center. Like we have some great doctors, or a neurologist. Someone might be more specialized. But again, medications aren't always indicated, and they're not always helpful. But look for maybe another specialist. Right. All right. Someone's brain injury was a few years ago, and they're asking, will recovery be impacted by age? Still experiencing dizziness and symptoms. Okay. So with the traumatic brain injury, they found that age didn't have any correlation with the amount of fatigue you feel. So, I have folks who are younger, middle age, older ages, and sometimes they can all have the same fatigue as one another, or more or less. I don't really see the connection to age, and the research hasn't either. Even after doing the vestibular therapy I see that you did, you might still have dizziness. That's something that sometimes you can manage too. Maybe your vestibular therapist says, you might experience this, but there's ways to monitor that as well. It's tough because, after a brain injury, I tell people it is a journey. It's a journey I wish no one had to be on, but it is a process. So the more tools and things you can gain to help yourself will help you feel better. But age, it's not always just because of age, and it's not always just because of time, since the injury. Someone's asking, okay, I mentioned melatonin, and I've discussed the neuroinflammation is one of the theories for neurofatigue. Are there any supplements I can recommend? So I would ask doctors, again, I don't want to go outside of my scope with this one. Talk to a doctor or talk to a nutritionist about supplements that can help with neuroinflammation, because there are some substances that generally help with the inflammatory response. But on this platform, I don't want to talk outside of my area of expertise. So I'm sorry I can't answer that one directly. I'd say, again, there's no magic, one that will fix it all, but there are some supplements, some vitamins and things that can help with the inflammatory response. I would check your nutritionist or another general provider. Good comment. Someone said that an adult beverage brings on neurofatigue like a sledgehammer, right? Well, after a TBI. Yes, so that would be a trigger, and that's a trigger. You're right, I should have included that in there because that's common, right? One of the things that happens after traumatic brain injuries, including the mild traumatic brain injuries and concussions, is that tolerance for alcohol can change a little. Again, this is probably going back to how this is all biochemical cellular changes happening in your brain. So yes, common, I hear that your alcoholic and adult beverages can change. They feel different, how you're able to function with those. So just keep it in mind, right, that that's going to be a trigger for you and that can impact your neurofatigue. Very good question though. Yes, it is common. You are not alone on that. Will neurofatigue ever improve? Oh, that is a fantastic question. Let's see, let me just scroll up a bit. Okay, I see someone who went to Rusk. Very nice. I worked there for my internship. Great folks over there. It does improve. This is a tough question this person is asking because they're saying, will neurofatigue ever improve? They're a number of years out. They've had the strategies that they know. They're self-aware. They're using them as best they can. Yeah, and it's still, you're right, it can still creep up on you. They're saying neurofatigue, they still feel like they're trying to be self-aware as possible and they still get tired and fall asleep without even realizing it. That can still happen, right, is that it does take a constant vigilance, and that's the exhausting part of the journey, is that the strategies I give you are things you have to take in your toolkit and continue to work, or strategies that you've already gotten. For example, it can and does improve over time, but it can really vary. So the best I can say is, you keep using those strategies, that you're gentle with yourself on those times that maybe you slip and you didn't notice something, and try to find even new ways to notice, because maybe that neurofatigue changes over time and you want to see, okay, what are my symptoms now? But it's tough. It's tough to do. All right, someone says that they had a severe TBI years ago and they need a lot of sleep every day. And often feel awful, they can't do anything. So yes, you're welcome for the information. I would say some of it you just need sleep, or maybe you need to be managing the neurofatigue in some of these new ways and resting maybe smaller amounts earlier, or it might be something you want to speak with another physician about, to say, I need so much of this sleep, what's going on, is there anything we can do? Sometimes nutritionists are good people to talk to because they can help with some either dietary changes or different supplements that can also help with fatigue, like some of the B vitamins. But that is tough. I hope that you can help use some of these. Apps to manage neurofatigue, phone apps, great question. A lot of my phone apps are meditation related. I like Insight Timer. Lumosity just came out with one that they use called, I think, Lumosity Mind. It's a meditation app. You've probably heard of Calm and Headspace. Those ones, you have to pay for at a certain point, but they're great. From the neurofatigue specifically, maybe that's something someone wants to develop as an app for that. Folks who have iWatches and things like that, smartwatches, sometimes they'll tell you when you need to breathe, or maybe you could program a watch or a phone just to go off every so often during the day to check in. So I'll have to look more into that. I'll let you know if there's a specific neurofatigue one. I don't know of one off the top of my head. Like I said, if someone wants to develop that would be great. But some of those are my meditation apps I like people to use. And if you have more questions about those, I can send those out and write those up later. Research. All right, I see someone asking a question about research. I will address that. I can address you offline. I do see your question, so I can send you some of those. During COVID, many psychologists and psychiatrists are not seeing new clients. This can increase anxiety and stress. Absolutely. Any recommendations? There's a lot of people doing teletherapy right now, so I would look into that option. I would say look up teletherapy. A site that I use a lot is psychologytoday.com. It has a whole bunch of therapists you can search in your area by zip code, by insurance, and I believe the site is now indicating whether the person does teletherapy or not. And so maybe that's kind of the best I could do is look for teletherapy options. Somebody asked, they're doing pretty well after a stroke, and will this get worse again later? That's tough. With neurofatigue, I usually say it's something that if you manage it, it's not going to get worse. If you're doing pretty well now, keep doing what you're doing. Of course, the aging brain can change things and be different, but that's why I'd say always just monitor your symptoms and know what you feel like. And when you notice a change, that would be a time to talk to a neurologist or a doctor or a neuropsychologist and say something has changed. But if things are going pretty well, keep doing what you're doing because that's something that's clearly helping you. I think I may be running out of time. I think we have a little more, but Laura can jump in and interrupt me whenever she wants me to stop. But we've got like another minute, so let me just see. Some I won't get to, but I will look at. We will hold on to these and I'll try and address them later. Someone works for a nonprofit day program that supports adults with brain injury. Wonderful. Thank you for the work you're doing. What can we do to mitigate neurofatigue symptoms by arranging the facility to allow for people to apply these strategies? Great question. I think off the top of my head, I'd say creating spaces for people to rest, especially with stimulation. Facilities, I know even where I work, these glaring overhead fluorescent lights are the worst. But if you can create a room or a corner or space where lights could be dimmed, where maybe there's either soothing music or maybe even headphones, people could listen to a meditation. I think that helps with the sensory stimulation, places to go to avoid noise and light and just have kind of a quiet moment. Maybe also having kind of some sort of area where people could do less cognitive tasks, more either physical, if there's a yoga space or stretching, again, or a mindfulness meditation space. But I love your interest in that because it's so important, and we don't always think about that, about the environment. But that would be my first thought is, can you find a way to manage stimulation from light and noise just to help people get away and have a break? Or maybe even having timed breaks throughout the day for people. Oh, sorry, I didn't scroll down. This person said they have couches, softer lighting, a garden, fountain with a front porch. Beautiful. What a nice place. Like I said, even if there's just more rooms or places for people to step away, or advertising them as neurofatigue rest zones, that might be it. People might not think to use those unless they know why they should be using them. So maybe timed breaks during the day and then having people go to those areas. Attention is a challenge. Can you comment on how much attention deficit is responsible for neurofatigue and how much is a result of it? So when you say attention deficit, I'm not sure if that meant like an ADHD. I'm going to address it as in attention deficits that happen after brain injury, which is maybe what you meant too. Attention is a big one. It requires so much of our energy, and I find that lack of focus and concentration is very common when you're more fatigued. So when you say what's responsible for and what's a result of, it's an interesting relationship because the more attention you have to pay to something, that's draining your energy a bit, and if you get fatigued faster. But then On the other hand, the faster you get fatigued, the more fatigued you are, the worse your attention is. So delicate balance, and it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But definitely be careful to watch out for the attention. So if you have a very attention demanding task, you need to have high accuracy, attention to detail, or you're driving, know that that will fatigue you faster, and you need to plan those breaks accordingly. Does weather affect neurofatigue? I have a lot of people that weather can impact a lot of things after brain injury. People get more of the headaches, or they feel a little more off after. So I think certainly if you have a headache, more of a headache or a body symptom, that is your mind's attention and energy going somewhere, so you will probably feel more fatigue that day. It's tough on those stormy weeks, I know.
Dr. Fultz, maybe one more question, and then we can move on. I know we've gone over, but we have so many great questions. So maybe if you could do one or two, and then we could start to wrap it up.
You got it. All right. So let's see what we got here. I did have someone say that as you get better using strategies, you get better at managing your fatigue over time. Thank you very much for that comment. I think that comment is directed out to all of you who are asking, does it get better? So again, this other person has commented, as you get better using strategies, you get better at managing your fatigue over time. Thank you for that comment. I definitely agree with that. Can PTSD from the loss of a loved one be considered a brain injury causing neurofatigue? So I would, PTSD of course can impact the brain, how it functions. It's not what in my scope of work here and in this presentation I would call a brain injury. This is more something, that has caused some of the physical changes or a direct injury to the brain. But PTSD can certainly impact attention, right, and sleep, and the emotional aspect of it. I think PTSD and from loss, a key thing you want to make sure you look out for is the emotional fatigue. So if you feel that your PTSD is really well treated, and you're managing it, and you still feel tired, well then yeah, maybe there is a neurofatigue because you're taking more attention and you have to spend more attention on things because of your PTSD. So although I don't define PTSD as a brain injury just in the sense of, the work I do, it certainly impacts a lot of these areas, and I really encourage you to make sure you're taking care of that emotional fatigue. Maybe there's neurofatigue there as well, and that's where you have to kind of experiment with what works. All right, someone is taking the notes. Yes, there will be a copy of this out that then you can share and watch. So yes, anyone who was stressed or worried about taking notes, please don't. We will have it available for you. And it's good to get support where you can. We have support groups out there. You have providers and centers and people out there who want to help you. So I hope this helped everyone out a little bit today understand neurofatigue and kind of approach to take. For those of you doing the work with neurofatigue, you've had a brain injury, keep going. It takes a lot of work and effort. It's worth it. And be gentle with yourself. And thanks to all those out there who are helping those with brain injuries. Thanks for having me.
So Dr. Fultz, at this time, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to present on this topic, which we had a record number of attendees and registers for this presentation, and I found it wonderful. I'm going to be using some of these strategies myself.
Yes.
I wanted to let everyone know that is attending today that you will be able to watch this webinar again on our website, which is bianj.org/webinars. So you will be able to watch that again. Also, and I had put this information in the chat also, if you did ask a question that we did not get to, because we did have many questions come in today, and unfortunately we don't have time to address all of them. But if you did ask a question and it was not addressed, you can email that question to myself, and I will make sure that it gets forwarded to Dr. Fultz. So my email address is, so if you have a pen, please write this down, Jacobs. That's my first initial last name. So it's LJACOBS at BIANJ.org. Okay, so again, that's ljacobs at BIANJ.org. And you can send your emails or any other comments that you'd like me to forward to Dr. Foltz, and then she will get back to you, or she'll get the answers to me and I'll send them out to you. To receive a certificate of participation today, you need to stay on till the end, and a link will come up in which you will click on that link, put information in, and you will receive a certificate that you partook in today's webinar. So again, thank you, Dr. Foltz, and at this time, the webinar has come to an end. Have a great day.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, BIANJ, for all your work.